social connection is the single greatest preventative action to avoid depression. The solution to our young problems and to our seniors is not telling them that they need to get better. We need to help them get better. This is a societal problem, not an individual problem. Focus on building healthy relationships all the way along the journey so that you can have more joy in your life.
Welcome to the 1 Million Years of Joy podcast. I'm Dr. Andrea Benaker, your host, and my intention is to inspire you to find more joy in your life through the stories from our guests and the science on joy and purpose. Pete, welcome. It's such a pleasure to have you with us today.
Great to be here, Andrea. Thank you so much.
Pete, in 2016, you launched the GenWell Project, a human connection movement after a journey in various roles and industries. Can you share with us what ignited your passion to promote human connection?
Yeah, I'll give you two sides of that answer. Number one, the original inspiration behind the entire movement was the summer blackout of 2003, when all the power on the eastern seaboard for 50 million people went without power for 2 to 7 days. And that night I was at a friend's house and we were having a barbecue like many people did once we realized that, TV didn't work, radio didn't work, phones didn't work, computers didn't work, nothing worked. And so when we were actually bored, we next looked to the next best thing that we all love to do, which is connect. And so I was at a friend's house, and at 9 o'clock at night, I walked onto his front porch, and the street, which was a quiet side street, was filled with people. And I lived on a busy thoroughfare, and I walked out on the street thinking that this would be the type of street that I would like to live on because everybody obviously knew each other. And when I walked out to the street and I said to people, "Hey, I love you guys. This is amazing. You all know each other." They looked at me and said, "We don't know each other." And it was right at that moment that I realized that unfortunately, too many of us don't even know the people we live beside or work beside or play beside or sit beside, wherever that situation might be. And I think I had realized that we created such an individualistic society. And unfortunately, it took crises for us to actually talk to each other. And so that moment stuck with me for over a decade when I kept saying to people, wouldn't it be great if we had a reason to connect without a crisis, without a need for us to worry about something not going right, but that we did it proactively, and that we thought, wouldn't it be great if on 2 weekends a year or on different occasions that somebody said, this weekend is about us getting connected and reconnected with the people who make us happier and healthier. And I'll throw a second part in there is I was in for-profit for 20 years. And when I left for-profit, I was volunteering my time for Movember, the mustache charity. I'd volunteered in the past, but never, well, I guess I was never in between jobs. And so when I was volunteering, I was really enjoying what I did as a volunteer. And then I got the opportunity to meet the CEO of Movember. And because the way I like to describe it, I was shining my brightest. I was doing something with purpose. I was doing something that made me happy and smile, and I was meeting people. And that also is something as an extrovert that I loved. And so I had the opportunity to fall into the not-for-profit space. And it really awoke me that you can create a lifestyle, you can create an income and do a job that actually makes you feel good each and every day when you wake up. And so as I like to say, I fell out of for-profit, and I'm now addicted to the purpose that comes in helping other people each day.
How incredible. And can you give us more details on the lives that you've impacted as a result of everything that you currently do as part of your movement?
Yeah, thank you for asking. I have a school teacher in Toronto who has been sending me an email after every newsletter for nearly 5 years and says thank you for doing what you do. But I've asked him if he wants to have a coffee, and he keeps saying, no, 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 you don't need to waste your time with me. I just need you to know, thank you. You're making a difference in people's lives. I had a lady last week, I'd say she was probably 40 something, and she came up to me after a keynote I did in Edmonton, And she was grateful for our message because she struggled with severe social anxiety since the global pandemic. And, her husband is trying to be empathetic and compassionate, and the people around them are, but they can't understand it because we've never educated people on social connection or the struggles or what we might do to overcome it. And so she was grateful to have somebody in the room explaining what social connection is and what social health is, which is really the positive, proactive, and upstream action that we can all take to improve our mental and physical well being. And I had a young kid, we do workshops in classrooms as well, and I had a young kid in Edmonton as well at NATE, the culinary college there. I did a workshop, and when we talked about, okay, now that you know the information, and I said, so what is everybody going to do differently? And a young lady put her hand up and said, I think I'm going to start saying hello to people when I come in each day. And Andrea, those are small, they're little tiny things, but if we get a lot of people to take a little tiny step forward, who start to say hello to people. Another gentleman, I have to tell this story as well. So, one of the things I say is everybody in here is a leader in this room. I said, is there anybody in this classroom? And there was probably 120 kids. I said, is there anybody in this classroom that thinks they do something that other people would enjoy doing, that they could take a leadership role and share your passion with other people? And a boy in the back room is very quiet, very meek. He said, well, I like to hike. And I said, oh, that's amazing. When are you going hiking next? And he said, I'm going to go on Sunday. I think this was Tuesday. And so I looked around the room. It looked like it wasn't a very connected class. And I said, hey, everybody, who would like to go hiking on Sunday with him? And slowly but surely, one hand went up and then another hand went up. And we got 15 people in literally 10 seconds. We connected 15 people around going for a hike. And I told them to send me a photo. So I hope I get one. I got to follow up. That was earlier this week. So hopefully we'll see that they got together and that hopefully we started to build a connection through hiking and created a community where everybody can lean on each other.
I love everything that you have shared. And what comes to mind is a reality that many individuals are just so immersed in the virtual world, as we call it, looking at their phones. And sometimes, even if you're in a public space, you're looking at everyone, and no one is actually looking at each other, right? And I was wondering if you could share some insights on how could the younger generations that have been so immersed in technology and social media, how could they put, if you wish, less importance on that and elevate their focus on face-to-face connection?
Well, geez, how much time do we have today? Because this is a doozy. But there's a new book called The Anxious Generation out there by Jonathan Haidt. It's a beautiful book. If anybody really wants to understand how devastating
Mm.
technology, or at least social media, is to our young, even as a human connection campaign, we're not anti-technology because look at what we're doing today. We're having an amazing, engaging conversation, and although we've never met in person, I can see your face. What we like to say, it's a great supplement to connecting face to face. But I think there's two sides of it. Number one, we need people to understand the devastating impact of spending too much time on social media, the emotional impact, the negative consequences to the dog eat dog competitive world that we put out there. And when we're looking at it constantly and not getting a break from it, to go spend time with other people. So, first part is helping us all recognize just how bad it is. But number two is our side of things, which is for 20 years, we've told kids to put the phone down and it hasn't worked. And that book says one thing, and then I have another thing, which is number one, it says, look, if we get one kid in the classroom to put the phone down, but there's still 20 other kids who have the phone, that one kid can never win
Mm.
because that one kid, he feels lonely and isolated because everybody else is still texting. So what we need to do, and I say we as parents, as leaders, as teachers, as professors, we need to be the ones for our young. And I don't know what young is. I think in the US, they're now looking at banning phones to 16 or banning social media, I think, to 16. And so to me, somebody has come up with the idea that up until 16, no phones, no technology, and no social media. I think that's a great starting point. Let's not get our kids addicted when they don't have their frontal lobes that can help us make good decisions because we've never learned to make good decisions. So we just make whatever makes us happy. So there's number one is recognizing that this is not about empowering individuals to solve the problem. This is a societal approach. So it's a classroom approach. It's a workplace approach. It's a home approach. How are we going to solve this? And then number two, once I get you to put the phone down, which is already difficult enough because we're up against teams of behavioral scientists, it's okay. Well, I can send my son out on the street, but if no other kids are on the street,
Mm.
well, then he's just going to come back in because he's going to be bored. So we as a society need to build connections on our streets, in our homes, in our workplaces, in our classrooms. And we need to start getting out and connecting with each other, whether it's through play and sports or arts and craft or book clubs or, and frankly, as we always say at GenWell, I don't care how you get connected. And I don't care if it's one person or 100 people. Whatever you love to do, what we need to do is get outside and share and talk and build these connections because when we talk to each other, we will find out that we have far more in common with each other than we do that differentiates us. So it's kind of both sides. We got to get away from the tech, but we also got to tell people, what do you want me to do with all that time? Because the average young girl today is 20 hours a week on social media. And that's 20 hours a week that they're not outside playing hide and seek or kick the can or arts and craft or playing with dolls or throwing a baseball, whatever they want to do. I don't care. But the reality is we need to help our young. The solution to our young problems and to our seniors is not telling them that they need to get better. We need to help them get better. This is a societal problem, not an individual problem.
Agree with everything that you have shared, and this made me think of an insight that emerged on the radio just as I was driving the other day. And they were saying that there was this school in the US that actually decided to take away all mirrors in the school. And the reason they did that is because they were looking at all these kids that were taking breaks during the classes, imagine, and sometimes multiple breaks. So they were not even interested in the education side or whatever they were learning. They were going in the bathroom to actually videotape themselves and then put those videos on YouTube or other social media channels. And so the radical approach that the school decided to take was to actually take down the mirrors. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, I sense that probably ties back to social media and the fact that we've spent more time looking at ourselves, during the pandemic, as, when we look at people in real life, like right now, I see you and I see me. But in real life, if I'm having a conversation with you, I don't see me. And so we have become far too used to looking at ourselves.
Mm.
Plastic surgery has gone up since the start of the global pandemic because people have spent so much time looking at themselves on a Zoom instead of looking at the people that they're talking to.
Mm.
So all of this comes back to a very, it's the growing issue of self glorification, because in the old days we didn't look at each other ever. We looked at the mirror once. We brushed our teeth. I looked in the mirror. I was good. Okay, good. And now I go to school and I never looked in a mirror ever again. And unfortunately, today, this is a mirror because you're looking at the photos you take, the videos you take, you're checking yourself. I understand that. I'm assuming the school has already taken away the phones and now they're taking away the mirrors because if you took away the mirrors, but you didn't take away the phones, I think you're missing the most important part first.
Yeah, you're so right. And as you're sharing a lot of these insights, I know that GenWell has done a lot of research on the impact of and the importance of face-to-face social connections. I was wondering if you can share with us some of the key highlights from your research.
Yeah, and again, our research, we do the Canadian Social Connection Survey. We've done that for 3 years. That's all contributing to the development of the social connection guidelines, which should be coming out at the end of the summer, maybe in the fall. this year. And those guidelines are not just informed by our research, they're informed by the plethora of research that's gone on in this area around the world. Dr. Julianne Holt-Lundstad out of the US, she's probably the leading researcher globally. And so she's done lots of great research. There's research being done in the UK and the US on talking to strangers, so much that has been done. And really all we're doing is packaging it all up in a form where people can consume it. So for me, I think there's two sides of it. Number one is understanding the negative consequences that come when we feel disconnected. So that's heart disease, dementia, diabetes, suicide, addiction, obesity, cancer. And really, when we feel disconnected from other people, it increases inflammation in the body. When we feel anxious, when we feel stressed, and that inflammation in the body can lead to a whole variety of issues, both mental and physical. On the positive side, when we feel socially connected and supported and a sense of belonging, it's the single greatest, our relationships are a single greatest contributor to our happiness. It increases empathy and compassion. It reduces anxiety and depression, which in some cases are at the highest levels in Canadian history, strengthens your immune system, strengthens your self-confidence. It's a great way to treat anxiety. And then finally, there was a study that came out at the end of the global pandemic that social connection is the single greatest preventative action to avoid depression. And again, our message is always, we should probably let people know this if this is what the research is telling us. But there's also a third piece, Andrew, that I think is really important for us to talk about, which is the societal impact. Because when people feel disconnected, you know, sometimes we blame ourselves, and that probably results in a mental or physical health issue. But then there's societal impacts because when I feel disconnected from other people, I may get sick, but I also may get angry. I may get, fear, aggression, racism, anger, extremism, random acts of violence. All this stuff starts to come out in people when I don't blame myself, but I blame you or my next door neighbor or my teacher or my former boss. And so we've seen unfortunate situations where people go back in those situations and they do something horrible. And so when we talk about building a more connected Canada as part of GenWell Canada's Human Connection Movement, we don't just think about it as the individual health and well-being of me. We need to think about it the health and well-being of you and the people we live beside and work beside and go to school beside, because we've always heard it takes a village, but it takes a village to do far more than just raise our kids. It takes a village for us to survive this thing called life. And we need each other more than ever right now.
Can you share with us more details on how often we need those face-to-face interactions to be able to benefit from everything that you have just shared?
So, the interesting thing about social connection or feelings of loneliness and disconnection and social isolation vary by each person. So some people need to see one person a week and they're totally comfortable. Solitude is the opposite of social connection. And so some people are really comfortable in solitude when we choose to be in solitude. So what we need to understand is, what is loneliness? Loneliness is the difference between the relationships that we have and the relationships that we desire. And so we need to, each of us, assess our own well being. We have a social health quiz at genwell.ca that everybody can go over and take the social health quiz. And depending on where you score, it will give you some ideas on how you can build, or if you're in a great place, it'll tell you that you can help other people. But if you have a gap and if there's opportunity for you to grow, it'll give you some ideas on where you might look to build more social health. So it really is up to everybody. But I can tell you, although the guidelines will not be giving people a specific number, the guidelines will be doing what I say right now, which is, hey, if you're here and you still feel disconnected, then you need to do more.
Mhm.
If you're here and you're fine, then don't worry about it. But if you're here and maybe you're exhausted from how much time you spend with other people, maybe you want to spend more time in solitude. Our job is not to tell everybody what to do. Our job is to give everybody the information to help people decide for themselves what they need more of and what they need less of. But what I was going to say is really interesting is that the numbers came back to the people that felt most socially connected, who were happiest and socially connected. It was 2 to 3 hours a day. So finding that time, not transactional work, but spending time having a conversation, spending time over a meal, spending time, at the end of the day, decompressing, having a conversation with family, friends, neighbors, all the different people in our lives. And even at the coffee machine when you're at the office, when you talk about last night's hockey game or tomorrow's meeting or something, where it's not about just transactional work. And to me, 2 to 3 hours, I've never been conscious of 2 to 3 hours, but we know that people struggle to do 20 minutes of exercise a day. Now, I don't think talking is as difficult as exercise, at least it isn't for me. But at the end of the day, when you say to people right now, because the average person is spending so much time on this thing, if I say to people, you need to find 2 to 3 hours a day to connect with other people, I think a lot of people will be very, concerned as to how am I going to find that amount of time in my day?
And thank you so much for sharing, because indeed, I think there's also a factor of personalities. As you're saying, some people are introverts or extroverts. And I would imagine that for someone that is an extrovert, you would need more face to face interactions, and you actually are going to be experiencing more joy as a result of those interactions, while someone who may be an introvert may actually enjoy more time in solitude.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Another one of the research findings that I thought was very interesting from what I've been reading as it relates to things that were shared on GenWell was that the research is showing that loneliness increases with age. What can you share with us about preventing that loneliness in old age?
Well, I feel like I'm making this difficult for every answer, but I'm going to say two things. Number one, I think we have to get away from broad stroking any age, any culture, any way we want to slice and dice and identify people. We have to understand that everybody feels lonely, and unfortunately, I think we've even done a disservice, Andrea, to a point, is that we've only talked about the crisis of loneliness. We've only spoken about what we are really talking about in the media is the small percentage. No percentage should feel chronically or persistently lonely, but the people who are at risk of heart disease, dementia, diabetes, suicide, addiction are people who are chronically or persistently lonely. Feeling lonely is no different than being thirsty or hungry. Loneliness is a great thing. The body and the brain are amazing tools to wake us up to when we need food, we get hungry and we go get something to eat. When we're thirsty, we go get something to drink. When we're lonely, we should do the exact same thing. We should go, oh my God, I'm lonely. Hey, let me go call Andrea and go have a conversation, or let me go to the coffee shop, or let me go to the dog park, or let me go upstairs, like I'm in the basement here. You know, what do I need to do to address loneliness? So I think we're doing a disservice right now, to be honest with you, in the media, is we're portraying loneliness as a crisis when what I think we need to do is wake people up to the truth around loneliness and help them understand, because we've never spoken about loneliness before. We've spoken about kindness, but kindness is not, that's not really social connection is how we address loneliness. Kindness is a way to start up a conversation with somebody, but we need people to understand it's how we interact with each other as a stranger, as a neighbor, as a colleague, as a classmate, as even a friend or a family member. When we text somebody, we all underestimate the value of a text to each other. And so when I think of somebody, rather than putting it off and doing it later, maybe a couple times a day or maybe 5 minutes every morning, you send out two texts to somebody and you just say, hey, Andrew, I was thinking about you. How are you doing? Because that is how we start changing the way people think about loneliness and how we are all part of the solution to the struggle that many people face. So back to your question just about, seniors. Well, seniors are higher, but so are young people. But there's, 90% of new moms feel lonely. Over 50% of CEOs and entrepreneurs feel lonely. And so what we need to recognize is that we all feel lonely. And when it comes to seniors and young people, as we were talking about at the start, the solution to seniors' loneliness is not telling seniors that they should get more social. The solution to seniors' loneliness is educating everybody else that it sucks to be a senior and be lonely. And so, do you know a senior? Do you have a neighbor? Do you have a family member who's a senior? Do you know somebody that you used to work with? What can I do to send a note to somebody to say, hey, I was thinking about you. How are you doing? Would you like to have a chat? Would you like to go for coffee? People just want to know that they haven't been forgotten. This is why we are building a movement, a national consciousness around the importance of social connection so that we recognize that the solution is not one group or this group, that it's all of us. And if we all change the way that we interact with each other, we'll solve everybody's sense of disconnection and loneliness.
So, Pete, if I understand correctly, what you're saying as a result of the movement that you've created and the research that you have done is that it's all forms of connections with individuals. It doesn't necessarily have to be face to face. It can be a phone call, it could be a Zoom call, it could be a text that we're sending that has those positive impacts on humans' lives. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Technology is a wonderful supplement to the human interactions that we all need. So we are not anti technology, and we should all be using technology, but we should be using it to build connection, not to scroll and not to passively watch other people live their lives. A study came out of Montreal near the end of the global pandemic that shows a face-to-face interaction has 9 times the brain activity as a digital connection like we're doing right now, because 80 to 90% of communication is nonverbal. So what we lose by doing this is we lose the nonverbal cues. You and I don't know, you could be 6'6" or 5'2", and I could be, the same. But when we walk into a room and we get that time to sit around a table and we sit down and maybe we have a coffee together, and I notice that you take sugar and I don't take sugar, or maybe you like oat milk, and there's a conversation that happens that just doesn't seem to happen quite as well when we're digitally connecting. But what a beautiful way for us, if we're separated by geography, if we're separated because we're just busy today, then hey, Andrea, let's get on the phone today, but I look forward to seeing you tomorrow or the next day or next week. I have a friend, I did a WhatsApp this morning with a friend of mine in South Africa that I haven't seen in probably 8 or 9 years, but we still talk once a month. We get on WhatsApp but we had a bond before. And so this is a great way to sustain that relationship and fortunately, I'm going back to South Africa for this Christmas, and so I'll get a chance to see him again. But that'll be 10 years of technology to get back to one face to face, and that consistency of being on technology will make that connection feel like there was no time lost at all.
How beautiful. So, Pete, please share with us when you started the GenWell movement and where you see the progress and the impact that you have had to date. How do you feel? And did you imagine you would be where you are today when you started everything?
Don't get me emotional, Andrea. When I started this because I needed a movement that gave me permission to reach out to my friends more often and say, hey, let's get connected. Because sometimes I get caught up in work and I forgot to reach out to my friends. And then time gets bigger between those gatherings. And sometimes you feel guilty because you didn't work on building those relationships for a period of time. So when I started it, I did it because I think I needed it, but I also saw from the work that I had done in the past, I saw how happy connecting with other people made all of us. And so when I started the movement, I just wanted to make people happier and help. I wanted to make people happier. I wanted to give them occasions to get together. Then the research really started to sink in with me as to, oh my gosh, this is no longer just about fun and happy and playful. This is actually very serious. And when I started to recognize that around 2017, Several people came into my life, Dr. Quam McKenzie, who's a global expert on the social determinants of health. A guy named Paul Estee has played a really important role in supporting the work we do. My partner has played a big role. And what I started to see was the experts were kind of coming forward. There's a doctor out of Simon Fraser University, Dr. Kiffer Card, and all these people started. I started seeing people, and I would reach out to them, and they would explain to me how important what I was proposing could potentially lead to. But I will tell you, Andrea, that for the first 6 years, if you weren't an expert in social connection or in social well-being, you didn't understand what we were talking about. And then well, I know the pandemic came. We ripped people out of each other's lives for 2 years. And even near the end, I wouldn't even say people were conscious yet. I think people became conscious when we started to go back to our normal or try to go back to what was the new normal. And that was when people started to recognize that they weren't okay. And that whether it was just getting out of your own home, whether it was relationships with your own family and friends, whether it was trying to get back to the office or rebuilding relationships with people in classrooms or in workplaces or in our communities, I think we all started to recognize, wow, this isn't going to be easy. You don't just snap back after 2 years apart. It's like going to the gym or not going to the gym for 2 years and then you go back to the gym. It's not easy. And so I think what I always knew it was going to be important, but I think with the pandemic and with the support we've been receiving over the course of the last 6 to 12 months, I now recognize that this campaign is needed more than ever before and that we are doing work with municipalities, healthcare, schools, workplaces, seniors organizations, marginalized communities, LGBTQ, BIPOC, new Canadians, because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter who you are. Human connection is the foundation of happy homes, streets, communities, classrooms, workplaces, and people. And so we need each other more than ever before. And I think this movement, the timing for it, couldn't be more important than it is right now.
And these human connections are also about joy in the end. That's truly what you're doing. You're bringing more joy into this world.
Absolutely. At the end of the day, if we create these connections, we are most joyful when we are with other people. We can be joyful on our own. But as I've often said, the memories that bring us the greatest joy when we lie on our deathbed are the ones that we've shared with other people. And those could be little things from a beautiful walk in the park to climbing a mountain to, going to a sporting event or eating great food. When we do it ourselves, it's good. It could be joyful, but it's far more joyful when we're high-fiving each other and saying, "Wasn't that amazing? That was awesome. That was my best meal." We get to reinforce for each other just how amazing those moments are. And so, yes, I think human connection is all about joy.
What are some of the hopes and aspirations that you would love to see in the future for GenWell?
Well, I have two hopes and aspirations. Number one is that we become a sustainable organization that, continues on for, I don't know, it took us 50 years to educate people about exercise, and we still talk about eating well, and that's 80 years later. We should have started this conversation 50 years ago, but we probably have, a good 10 or 20 years until we can educate every Canadian around the importance of this movement and this message. So those would be my two things. Number one, we're sustainable. And number two, we've built programs and campaigns that allow every Canadian, 40 million people, to understand how important their social well-being is. And that leads to better mental health, better physical health, safer streets, better community, more volunteering, more donations, more caring, empathy, compassion for one another, because we all have more in common with each other than we do that differentiates us. But yet, most of us don't even know the people who live right beside us. And so we need to build these connections so we can all live happily ever after.
If we are looking now at the organizational setting, often, as you're saying, sometimes we work with people that we may not necessarily know, as we may live next to someone, in terms of, the neighborhood in which we're living, and we don't necessarily know those neighbors. Um, what do leaders need to do to bring greater closeness among their team members within organizations?
That is a really great question. Well, I'm gonna say I just got off the phone with a guy. I won't use his name, but he's from the Toronto District School Board today, who may be one of the most inspiring leaders I've ever spoken to because of his understanding of the importance that he puts on building connection between his employees because he wants to make them be happy every day they're at work. And he wants them to leave and go home feeling fulfilled at the end of the day so that they can go home and put their mind and time into their families and into the things that they love to do when they don't work. So, you know, I think there's two comments I'll make. Number one is everybody can be a leader right now because a leader is somebody who reaches out to somebody else and says, would you like to have a coffee? Would you like to go for a walk? Do you want to go for a bike ride? Because every one of us has a superpower within us called human connection. And we need to help people feel more comfortable leading in reaching out to people and saying, I'm going to do this because I understand that it makes me happier and healthier and you. So, number one, everybody can be a leader. And I think it has to start from the top down. And I mean top down in any way in which it could be from a parent to a child. It could be from a teacher to the kids. It could be from the boss in a workplace to the rest of the employees. It could be from the prime minister, and the way he interacts with other people in the work he does. But that's at every political level. It's how are we starting the conversation to build the more connected Canada? If we know that this is the most fundamental need that we have as a human being, and it makes us happier and healthier. We spend $350 billion a year on healthcare in this country. And it's all about crisis management. We wait till people are sick or in crisis, and then we try to help them. Well, what if we actually invested a little bit of money in sharing this message, not just sharing it and spending money again, but actually inspiring people and creating? We have 7 campaigns now: GenWell Weekend, Talk to a Stranger Week, Loneliness Awareness Week, Face to Face February. Every one of these things is targeted at a specific community or type of connection so that we can get every Canadian to say, for this week, I'm going to focus on getting connected with my neighbor. Or I'm going to talk to strangers, or I'm going to call up an old friend, or I'm going to look for a senior or a young person. If we can get everybody to start thinking more consciously about this from the top of the political system, the top of the business community, education, if everybody thinks it and they all take one action, it won't be long until we all start thinking more proactively about our social connections and social health and have a meaningful impact on every Canadian in this country.
So beautiful, Pete.
Thank you.
When you look back on your own journey, what advice would you give your younger self about embracing joy and cultivating meaningful connections?
You know what I would actually I'm going to flip it the other way around, Andrea. I think in hindsight, I've been lonely many times in my life, but I was fortunate enough to have people around me, so I never had chronic or persistent loneliness. I never knew that until I started this campaign. But if I was to look back at my younger self today, I would say focus on building healthy relationships all the way along the journey so that you can have more joy in your life.
Wonderful. Pete, it's been such a pleasure to speak with you today. I
Thank
look
you, my
forward to
friend.
staying in touch and to support your movement in bringing more joy and a social connection to this world. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing our message. And I hope to get up to Montreal to see you shortly face to face so that we can continue this incredible conversation.
That would be awesome.